Hey there, sewing friends. Let's sew this top together today. This is New Look 6434. It's a basic top. I'm making it out of a cotton fabric. There are no buttonholes and no zippers. And we're going to make the version, well, you can choose whatever version you want, but I'm going to make the version with ruffled sleeves because I'm really into sleeves, cute sleeves at the moment, and I think they really add something to a basic silhouette. I have chosen this keepsake calico fabric that I purchased at Joann back in the day before Joann closed. I did pre-wash it, which is something that I often don't do. There's my big confession, but I've realized I need to start taking the time to do that, because who wants to put a lot of time into a project just to turn around and have it shrink a bit in the wash? I generally don't dry my clothes that I've made, so that's one of the reasons why I was in the habit of not pre-shrink or pre-washing my fabric. But who knows, sometimes it might just shrink a little bit in the wash, but that's besides the point. Anyway, so what you'll need for this project is your fabric, some elastic cord to securing the button on the back, 1/2-inch buttons, and we're going to need some 1/2-inch single fold bias tape. So there are 4 pieces here that we're going to use for view D. 1, 2, 3, and 6. 6 is the ruffled band around the sleeve. So go ahead, lay out your fabric, make sure you're following the grain line, and meet me back here and I'll show you what to do in the next step. Before you remove your 4 pattern pieces from your fabric, make sure that you have transferred all of the markings. We've got some markings here for sleeve location as well as for the darts. Our first step is to stay stitch around the neckline of the front and the back pieces. The purpose of stay stitching is to prevent any stretching of the neckline. So you'll want to stitch 1/4 inch from the edge, and you'll want to start at the shoulder seam and stitch down towards the center, stop, start at the top of the next shoulder and stitch down towards the center. And while you're there, go ahead and stay stitch the back neckline as well, starting at the shoulder seam, stitching down to the center on one piece, and then starting at the next shoulder seam, stitching down to the center. Okay, now you're ready for the darts. With right sides together, you will want to join the lines that you marked onto your fabric together. And one thing that I do to help line them up is I stick a pin from one side to the other, and then I go ahead and I place the pin along the line straight to keep my pieces together while I'm sewing it. So again, stick the pin through, make sure it comes out on the other side of the line, and place it into the line that you've transferred. You can also take a pin and place it perpendicular to the yellow dot, because sometimes when you're sewing that area, it's difficult to see where the end of your dart is. You will want to begin sewing from the edge of the fabric toward the dot. You can back stitch at the beginning of the dart, but you will not want to back stitch when you get towards the end, at the very end. So sew right off the fabric, making the point, and then leave some thread at the end, tails that you're going to tie into 3 knots to secure your dart. Once you have your dart sewn and your 3 knots tied, you can snip the thread, but leave a little bit of thread there at the end for the dart. And then iron your dart down toward the waistline. And then go ahead and do the same with the other dart. Okay, now you'll want to take both of the back sections and right sides facing, bring the center seam together. You'll see that there's a double notch, and you should also have marked a circle just right above that double notch. Now you'll want to stitch from the circle on down to the bottom edge of the back seam at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Be sure that you back stitch at the top of the circle to reinforce and back stitch at the bottom. And then head on over to your ironing board and be sure that you press that seam open. Once you have that seam pressed, you'll want to finish the seam. You can either zigzag the seam to finish it, or if you have a serger, you can serge the seam and make sure that you serge them separately, because you do not want to serge them together or you will be closing up the back opening of your shirt and you won't be able to get your head through if you do that. After you've finished your seam allowance, you'll want to take your back piece over to the ironing board and press your seam open and press 5/8 of an inch all the way up to the top of the neckline. Then for the back opening, you'll turn the opening over 1/4 of an inch. If you used a serger, the lines here are 1/4 of an inch. And so you can just turn that line of stitching underneath 1/4 of an inch on both sides to below the opening, and then again give it a press. Then we're going to take it over to the machine and we are going to stitch, create a box stitch. We are going to stitch down along the opening, pivot beneath the opening, and stitch back up to the top. And I'm just going to stitch as close as I can to that ironed fold. So I'm lining the edge of the fabric here up with the inside of my presser foot right here. Opening is right here. And then here is what the back opening looks like. inside. And we'll take our front piece, join the front to the back at the shoulder seams. So we're going to sew both the shoulder seams together at 5/8 of an inch, and then finish the tops of those seams. Okay, I find it easier to finish the seams after I've pressed the seams open, so that's why I always head over to the ironing board after I've stitched the seam together. So I'm going to go press the seam, and then I'm going to head over to my serger and finish off the shoulder seams. Okay, I'm going to show you how to sew on the corded elastic to use as the loop for your button. The instructions state to cut 1.5 inches of the corded elastic, which I've done here, and to fold it in half and place it close to the 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Since I could no longer see the dot that I had made from my markings, since I went ahead and stitched the opening closed, I just took this little ruler, hem ruler, and took my marking pencil and marked 3/8 of an inch from the top of the neckline. Then I folded that elastic in half and placed it right underneath my line. I have these nice, really long clips, so I used it to clip my elastic in place here. And then we're going to go over to the machine and stitch over this elastic close to the seam line here. You'll want to keep your elastic, the instructions say 1/4 of an inch over the edge of the opening. I'm using a button like this. Oops. And so I'm going to leave it just a tad bit more room there. So I think my loop is actually, well, it does measure up about 1/4 of an inch. So I'm going to go over to the machine now and stitch that elastic into place. To sew the neckline with right sides together, take your single fold bias tape, open it up, and with 3/8 of an inch of the bias tape overhanging the edge of your back opening, begin pinning the bias tape to the top of the neckline. Take your shirt over to the machine, begin sewing 3/8 of an inch from the edge all the way around till you get to the other side of the neck opening. After you've stitched the bias tape to the neckline, you'll want to trim your seam so that when we fold the bias tape over, the seam isn't sticking out from underneath the inside edge. So I've trimmed my seam about half of what was there after the stitching. And I really don't see any need to clip any of my curves, but if you feel the need in certain places to clip the curve, go ahead and do that. And I'm a big proponent of ironing as I go. So I went over to the ironing board and I ironed this flat where the bias tape meets the neckline. And now I will go back over to the ironing board and fold the 3/8 end of the bias tape over the edge here, and then fold the bias tape down across so that it's encasing the elastic loop. And I will iron the bias tape to the inside of the shirt, pressing this nice crisp seam at the top so that the bias tape isn't showing on the other side. I am going to stitch as close as I can to this bottom edge. And I'm actually going to stitch from the underneath because I want to make sure that I get the bias binding into the stitch. And I'm afraid if I stitch from the top side, I may go off that edge, and then that really becomes a big headache. So anyway, I have purple thread in my bobbin that'll show on the right side of my shirt, and I have black thread in the top. And here's the neckline. I'll take it over to the ironing board and give it a good pressing. It'll look much better after that. With right sides together, pin your front and back side seams together, being sure to match the notches. Then take this over to your sewing machine. Sew your 5/8 inch seam on both sides and finish your seams separately. I have stitched my side seams together, pressed them open, and then finished them on my serger. Now would be a good time to try your top on and decide whether you need to make any adjustments in the fit along the side. If you need to loosen it up a bit, well, you're going to have to take that seam out and maybe try a 1/2 inch seam or 3/8 inch seam on each side. If you make any adjustments, you will also have to make those adjustments when you sew both sides of your sleeves together, so keep that in mind. But hopefully everything fits fine and we don't need to rip out any seams. We're going to move on to the sleeves now. At our machine, we're going to switch our stitch length to 4.0 and create 2 lines of gathering stitches. One line at 5/8 of an inch and the other line at 1/4 of an inch from the edge. You'll want to sew that line of stitching between the notches. Do that with both of your sleeves. And also while you're there, take your ruffle and on the notched edge of the ruffle, do the same thing. Create a gathering stitch by sewing 5/8 of an inch from the edge and 1/4 of an inch from the edge. Once you have your gathering stitch in your sleeve. Bring right sides together on the notched edge and sew 5/8 of an inch. Press your seam open and again finish your seams separately. I have stitched the seams in my sleeve together, pressed them and finished it. And I have sewn my gathering stitch around the notched edge of the ruffle. You may need to pull your gathering stitch back a little ways so that it doesn't get caught into the seam, but sew the edges of your ruffle together at a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Press those seams open and finish the edges of the seam. In view D of the pattern, a scalloped lace is used to make this top. So the bottom of the top and the bottom of the ruffled sleeve is the scalloping of the lace. There's no hemming directions for view D. So before we attach the ruffle to the sleeve, I'm going to press 3/8 of an inch all the way around. Then I'm going to turn it over just a 1/2 of an inch. Press it, clip it into place, then go over to the machine and stitch about 1/8 of an inch from the folded line. And while I'm there, I might as well just hem the bottom of the top as well. So I will press over 3/8 of an inch at the bottom of the top, then turn it over another 1/2 inch, or you could go 5/8 of an inch, depending on where you like the length of your top. And then I will stitch all the way around about 1/8 of an inch from the top of this folded line. I have hemmed the sleeve ruffles, and I've hemmed the bottom of the top. We now need to attach the ruffles to the bottom of the sleeves. I folded the ruffle in half, and I'm going to place a pin on the other side directly across, well, from the seam. There's also a notch there, so that's our center point. And then I'm going to bring the pin over to meet the seam line in half in the other direction, and I'm going to place pins in those areas. In the millinery field, this is what we call marking our round sections north, south, east, and west. So if I have some markers to give me a sense of direction, I can place this ruffle onto the sleeve, matching up the same sections on the sleeve, and then pull my gathers in. I now have both my sleeve and my ruffle marked by the pins in the north, south, east, and west directions. With the two pieces right sides together, I am going to place the ruffle over to the sleeve, first matching up the side seams. And I always take a look underneath to make sure that my seams are lined up. Looks good. I'm going to go now to the other side where the notch is and pin those two sections together. And then over to the west side. I'll pin these two sides together And then over to the east side, I will pin the sections together. Then I am going to find the ends of my gathering, and actually I need to pull that off for a second. Find the ends of my gathering, and start moving my gathering stitches down the line. So I pulled that pin out there. I am gonna pull these gathers down towards the notched side. And we're gonna have to gather it quite a bit to get it to fit the sleeve. This is getting close. Okay, I have one side of the sleeve gathered, and now I'm going to move to the other side. Okay, I have the ruffle attached to the sleeve. I'm going to do the same with the other side. Double check also to make sure that your ruffles are evenly distributed. And once I have the other ruffle attached to the other sleeve, I am going to take this piece over to the machine and stitch 5/8 of an inch from the edge. You can baste this edge if you'd like, or if you feel a little more confident, you can go ahead and sew in your permanent seam line. I feel pretty confident. Famous last words. I often end up then spending more time tearing out stitching because I've got a weird kind of fold in the fabric. Okay, that looks good to me. I'm going to do the other sleeve, and then I'm going to head over to the machine, stitch my 5/8 seam allowance, then I will finish this seam together on the serger. Okay, I've sewn the ruffle on both sleeves, and also after you've sewn your ruffle to the bottom of the sleeve, you can go ahead and take those basting stitches out. And as you can see, I serged the edge for finishing. And then of course, I gave it just a quick press in the seam allowance. You don't really want to press too much where the gathering is, or you'll press out your gathering. Now it's time to attach the sleeves to the top. Our sleeves should be right side out, and our top is going to be inside out. We are going to match up our sleeve to the top at the seams. And at the center top, or this at the shoulder seam, you'll see you should have a circle marked, and you're going to line that circle up with the shoulder seam. Going to line up the side seams. And I am going to double check that those are directly meeting before I stitch them together, and they are. We're going to join our notches together. This is the wrong sleeve, so make sure you don't do that. And the reason that you know it's the wrong sleeve is because here I have my double notch, and here is the single notch. So I am going to grab the other sleeve, switch these out. So this is the correct sleeve. Single notch to single notch, double notch to double notch. Double notches indicate the back of the garment. So let's go back to this step, lining up my seams, side seams, making sure that they meet in the center. And they do, just a tiny bit over. Find my circle at the top of the shoulder for the sleeve and line that up with the shoulder seam. Ugh. I'm going to line up my notches. You'll want your gathering thread to kind of stay over here because we're going to be gathering or easing these sleeves into the armhole in a second. So I've lined up my notches. Might as well put another, I'm going to put another clip here. Let's line up the double notch in the back, bringing all these gathering threads to the other side of the notch so it'll be easier to gather. Okay, there's my double notch. I really like to use a lot of pins or clips, particularly around the lower edge of the armhole there, because it's so rounded and it's easy for things to move. Okay, so we are essentially going to be easing the sleeve. We've got a couple yellow dots here as well. Yellow circles, dots, whatever you want to call them, right here. So, okay. Now I'm going to put a clip right here. That way I know where those circles meet up. And I may have to move things a bit, but from here to here and here to here is where we need to just pull the basting threads a bit to ease the sleeve into the armhole. There's not going to be, we probably won't even notice any gathering when we stitch it in. It's just to ease it into the armhole. I'm going to find the ends of my gathering stitching. And begin easing in right here. That should really be enough. It's actually too much, but it's easier to let it out a little bit as we go. Okay, so I have this sleeve all clipped into the shirt, into the armhole of the shirt. I'm going to go over to the machine, stitch 5/8 inch all the way around, and then I'm going to do the same with the other sleeve. Then I'm going to take it over to the serger, finish that seam, and then give it a good press. I've sewn in both sleeves now. And except for sewing the button on the back, my top is finished. I will line my elastic loop up and then just sew my button. In a bit, I will put the top on and go out into the wild, take a few photos to show you. I would really appreciate if you would like the video and subscribe to the channel. It will really help me out as a content creator. And until next time, thanks for being here, everybody.